Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I know a few of you are from India and a lot of things are happening in India. I am in the US, so I cannot really know exactly what's happening, but all I'm doing is hearing. And I really hope you and your family are safe and doing extremely well. So, very warm welcome to this webinar. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of a case study, an experience that I had a few years ago working as an agile coach for a multinational bank. And one of the biggest issues they had was just being able to deliver. Um, I have, I mean, a long introduction has already been done, so I don't really plan to introduce myself anymore. But I do want to see if you can all access your chat window and share with me some issues you might have had implementing Scrum in your experience. If you can use the chat window to share one or two things, that'll be awesome. So we'll wait for you to do that in the chat window if you can find it. We have a very quiet audience, or people can't find the chat window.
I see one message come into the questions tab.
Questions, okay, part-time teams. Well, thank you for that, Jeffrey. That's about it. All right. Well, we'll see if we can get a little bit more of you engaged as we go through the presentation. So just wanted to share with you how I felt when I joined that organization. When I joined that organization, it just felt like it's some crazy dark alley. Things are really, really in shambles. That's not what you think about when you join a multinational bank, right? It's supposed to be great, but the only area or shining light was the agile coaching organization that was in the bank. Everywhere else, there was chaos. And one of the chaos that I happened to work with or work in had a very specific challenge. The challenge had to do with basically pleasing or delivering to an external regulator. The external regulator would be fining the bank millions of dollars if the client onboarding platform was not upgraded to the latest standards. Regulation was pretty high at that time, and one of the big things was we want to be able to ensure that the organizations trading with the bank are good organizations, have gone through all the checks and balances before they could be onboarded. And that was a huge thing in the sense that we had to collect about 3,000 data points per client record, and 4,000 complex business rules had to be run before the workflow for approvals for getting the client onboarded to trade with the bank could be done. Huge team, of course, because we had to deliver on crazy deadlines and timelines, which was not very, very easy.
I see a couple of more messages in the questions tab, Anil.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the engagement on the question tab. I really appreciate it. Keep going. Well, I'll keep going with my story. So something had to change. There was a huge storm everywhere, and things had to be delivered in time. And when I'm talking about time, 3 months at the max for every client type. So the client type could be an investment bank, a client type could be a commercial organization, a client type could be an individual. Any type of client that we wanted to onboard, we needed to get that done at least in 3 months. And it was a very, very Herculean task. Herculean task because we had 4 different backlogs, 4 different product backlogs. The main issue was we had 4 different backlogs. The backlogs were all over the place. We had to figure out the stakeholders had great big ideas for the product. That would be in a separate spreadsheet. The product owner had some features that were captured in another tool. Then we had the technology team having a bunch of things that they had recorded and were hidden and were not shared very well with the product owner. The users who were using the system in production found defects that would go into another defect management system. So pretty much the whole set of backlogs was all over the place, and it was extremely difficult for someone to prioritize. Well, also, they wouldn't talk that much. Collaboration between the product team and the technology team was really, really low, or almost nothing. No release planning, pretty much ad hoc sprint planning. Teams would run with strict command and control because the stakeholders and executive management thought, well, we need to ensure that we get this done or our heads are chopped off. And so let's push the team. Let's put a lot of crazy deadlines on them. And then a lot of roles and responsibilities were completely unclear. They were trying to do Scrum, but really, who was the product owner? Who knew? Who had the authority on a prioritization? Who knew? It was all over the place. And that's the issues we had. Now, again, in the chat window or the question and answer window, what I like to invite you to do is, if you were the coach here, if you were the Scrum Master here, what would you do? What would be your suggestion? Any thoughts, any ideas? None.
Dhatri says single tracking tool.
A single
Neenal
tracking tool.
says, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, this is the questions are coming in. It's in a small window for me, so probably not seeing
Yeah.
that fully. Unifying the backlog, calling them at one place to understand the gaps. Yeah. Clarities to individuals and accountabilities. Yes, you got it. You absolutely got it. All of you are thinking in the right direction, and that's exactly what I had to do. But before doing all of that, I had to ensure that I had the right sponsorship. I had the right backing. If you are planning to have Scrum in your organization be successful, then you need to have good leadership backing and sponsorship. If you don't have that, it's really going to be difficult for you to potentially do anything as a coach, as a Scrum Master. You might do it at a team level, but at this level, the levels that I'm talking about, it might be extremely hard to potentially move the organization in a different way. One of the things that we absolutely started doing and had to do was break down the silos of delivery silos. What I mean by that? What I mean by that is we had people who would be just focusing on building the code. We had people who would just be doing QA work. We had people who would be doing some other aspects of rolling out the product. All of them were different silos, and things were being passed around here and there. Lots of merges, code merges were being done manually. Whenever you want to do a code merge between 40 developers, 2 developers at the end of the sprint would just sit down and spend one day merging all the code from all over the world, from all the teams that were working on this product. And so it became almost unwieldy to make this work. So we had to break the silos down and get one team that is a Scrum team, but of course, broken down into multiple teams that were feature teams. And those feature teams would deliver aspects of the product. And that's the first thing we had to do. Again, getting the CTO's permission, getting the managing director's blessing was the most important aspect of getting that done. Once we had that, we moved to a single product backlog. Do you see my screen shifting now?
Yes.
Cool. We had a single product backlog, and that's what you mean by unifying the backlog. The backlog was one weekend. I took all the things that were all the 4 different sources of information that we had and merged them together. And we had almost about 2,500 requirements. in that backlog that were put together. And that was done over the weekend. And then the next week onwards, I started introducing this backlog, this new backlog, and this new way of working to everyone. And then we had to make sense of what items do we really want to focus on, and what are big items, and things that we might have to look in the future. But what are some of the things that are most important? What are some of the defects that we need to fix right away? What are some technical tasks that need to be done right away? And those were really, we had to spend some time, very focused time, with the product owners, with the teams, to decide what are things that were going to be on the top of the backlog. So we start refining the backlog, and we refine the backlog not just with the product owner or with one or two members of the team, but many a times with the whole team. Took a little bit of time, delayed us in many different ways, but then ensured that we had the right um, information, at least on the top of the backlog, if not everything, but at least on the top of the backlog. That was the biggest achievement that I would say we were able to do in that week. The next thing we did was we had to create um, a framework, for how the organization is going to be run, how the roles and responsibilities are going to be set up, and be able to get that done. Well, we used less, which is large scale Scrum, and we used that as a framework where we had a chief product owner, and then we had broken down the huge backlog into areas of features. And for each area, we had an area product owner that would take care of that view of that single backlog, and then ensure that he or she is working with the feature teams. And then the feature teams, who were basically broken down into many, many different locations. So we had New York as a location, we had Glasgow as a location, and then we had teams in India. And we broke them down and had features being developed and run sprints in 3 week. So each sprint was about 3 weeks. That's what the teams decided that they want to do. And that's what they did. And so this is one of the biggest changes, to sort of make sure that everybody knows what their roles and responsibilities are. The chief product owner makes the ultimate decisions and is responsible for every item, but there are some people who are helping him or her. And then also there are feature team members that are BAs, that are actually building the code, that are QAs, and so there are people who are deploying the code. So we had a whole feature team that could build part of the product or part of the features and deliver them. So this is one big change that had to be done to the team. Going to have to continue a little bit and talk about better stakeholder management. As this team started functioning, they were not perfect, not all the problems were fixed, but we started working. We started ensuring that we start chopping on the backlog and ensuring that we have some view into how things were working. What could be with this new structure, what could be our velocity? What could be, how is capacity being used? How are we planning? Started looking at planning in a little bit more depth. Took us about 3 or 4 weeks just to figure out how each of these teams now in a new structure is working together or not working together, and how we can help coach them as they go through their work. So this is extremely important. And the other side of the coin was, well, as this was happening, this huge change was happening, this huge transformation is happening, how to keep the stakeholder abreast, how to keep the stakeholder in line and ensure that they know what's happening, raise transparency as much as possible, even though not everything might be rosy, but raise that transparency and ensure that they understand what's going on. Stop here for a second, because I've been speaking for a while. There's a bunch of other things that I wanted to share, but I think there's a question from one of you. It says, was this huge product backlog manageable with a single PO? No, it wasn't, and that's why we used less, which was we had a chief product owner and then area product owners to take aspects of the single backlog and work with each other. The stakeholder management was a huge, big deal for us. And to ensure that we do that, every 3 weeks, at the end, we would do a review. And in that review with the stakeholders, ensure that we are sharing the plans. But during that transformation, during that change period that we started with the teams, we were actually meeting the stakeholders every week to keep them abreast of what's going on and how we are progressing. The biggest change was the quarterly release planning. Just let me know if you see that other next slide, which is the quarterly release planning slide.
Yes, we see that slide.
Okay, great. So that was the biggest change that we had to make because, well, we have a product backlog. We have teams structured well now. What was missing, what was really essentially missing was how do we plan to deliver to the external regulators in the 3 months that they were asking us to do so? What are components or aspects that we could actually build? What are the features we could build? The workflow was three-phased. There was an initial review of the customer. There was a review of the customers done by legal compliance. That was a separate review. And then the third review was a bunch of approvals. And the bunch of approvals had to go through many hands before the customer could actually trade. And so there was a three-phased approach, a three-phased workflow that needed to be done for each customer or for each organization. As you can imagine, for a large multinational bank to trade with another bank or another commercial organization, a commercial organization could be a McDonald's, a commercial organization could be a Burger King, to kind of trade with them, to work with them, they had to ensure that we could capture all their data as well as their business rules, as well as their workflow. And that in many, many cases, in many customer types, it was extremely hard to do and deliver in 3 months. So we had to focus on what should be the highest priority that the team can do, the developers can do, and ensure that product, that piece of the product can be delivered. There were other aspects of the workflow, especially the approval process. The bank actually hired some people outside, operational staff, that would do the that would do the approval process outside of the system, so that it gives the organization, the developers time to potentially build that out and did not have to get pushed towards that 3-month deadline. So the quarterly release planning was extremely, extremely important. We used to spend pretty much up to about 3 or 4 days just to work on the release plan because the number of backlog items. We started with about 2,500 requirements, but that slowly and quickly increased over time. And so we had to ensure that we can keep up. So used to take about that much time in the beginning. Get that plan together, get a communication out together, and see if those the tranches of delivery that we are doing with every sprint is actually working for the stakeholders. So kind of doing a little bit of due diligence. Would the plan always work? Of course not. The plan would change, but then we would ensure that we capture the velocity, we capture the performance of the team, and go keep updating the release plan based on that, and ensuring that we give advance notice so that if there are portions of the workflow that need to be done outside the system, we have the right staff to go ahead and do it. And that was a big, big thing that the stakeholders actually helped our team and invested in that by adding more staff, which could do some of this stuff outside of the system. As we started catching up and actually automating most of it as time passed. And we also then communicated our release plan with the external regulators, which is extremely, again, extremely, extremely important. One of the biggest aspects that the team was actually very, very weak on was the ability to automatically do all of continuous integration, automatically single click deploy in any environment was extremely hard for this team. In fact, like I mentioned, many a times there were two people at the end of the sprint spending about a day or two just trying to merge the code from 40 different developers who might have added to the code or might have changed some of the code and things like that. So it was extremely hard for them to figure out, if the merge code was right, wrong, put it in an environment test, put it in another environment test, and used to spend many hours, lot of money, and of course infrastructure to get this done manually. So a big side sort of work we started was to ensure that everybody first adopts Git. That was one of the aspects that we did next. After doing all of the other stuff, we focus now on improving the technical practices. So adopting Git, adopting feature level branching, the databases were manually moved or manually being copied from here and there many times in different environments. We basically made it so that the database could be automatically fully deleted and fully recreated on demand and automatically. And that was a big deal. Another thing we did was allow for single click continuous integration, and there were no manual merges anymore, and it was a single click deployment in any environment. And this was a huge improvement to how things were being done, how much time was saved in making that happen. I just wanted to stop for a second and again go back to the question box or the chat window and see what questions can I answer at this point for you. Something about the database. Do you migrate the database as is, or you had to perform cleansing? Well, no, this is database that did not need to be cleansed. It had really to be migrated as is to protect or keep the integrity of the data that was there. So data was not, there was nothing to be cleaned in the data. The issue was really there were additions being made. There was no tracking of where the data is at that time, and we had to stop. We had to keep trackers in the database to ensure that we know exactly where the database is, have backup copies, and then as the database goes down and we recreate it, we ensure that we get it to the exact same level of data that was there before. Well, the main thing that I wanted to share about this particular use case was that if you think about Scrum implementation, implementing Scrum in any organization, as you all know, is extremely hard. And what I wanted to really focus on is some of the key things that we had to do. This was for us, for me, from the time I started to when we had things working very well. It took us about a year and a half. But as we went through the journey, we delivered work which was successful, which was we actually avoided the fines that the bank had to pay. We were able to upgrade the client onboarding system at par with other banks and with other with what the external regulators wanted us to do. But in doing so, we had to ensure that the key aspect was we had the correct stakeholder engagement, we had the leadership sponsorship, we had the right organizational structure, we had a backlog which is not all over the place, we had a fantastic way to manage our releases and plan our releases, and then finally there was a bunch of important things that we had to do for ensuring that the team is up to the technical practices and is able to on the fly design, develop, and deliver code. And that was an extremely important aspect of this particular product and this transformation. And this team turned out after, again, the work that we were doing was a multi-year delivery, which went on for about 3 or 4 years after that. But at that time, the team was really set up to accomplish quite a bit. And this was one of the huge successful stories for this particular bank. Today, that product is being used by all the different lines of businesses in the bank, which is a pretty huge thing to say for this particular organization. I want to stop here, and I have some time for question and answers if you have any. If not, that was my story.
I see one question from Vinanti. In Scrum, do we have teams for each phase, like design, implementation, testing, etc.? That's the question.
I think there might be you might have missed a slide because we had issues with our slides today. There was a slide that we talked about feature teams, the concept of feature teams. Concept of feature teams is that you have everyone in the same team. There is a feature team that has all the skills necessary to build a part of the product or the whole product. If it's a Scrum team, it's a single Scrum team, you have all the skills necessary to build the whole product. If it is a huge product like the way I'm describing this one, we had to break that down, that product into areas or areas of feature areas. And for each feature area, we had all the skills necessary to build that feature area. And that was an important aspect to think about. So in Scrum, a Scrum team has all the skills necessary to deliver the product. I'm happy to hang on if there are any more questions.
What parameters or criteria have been used to select the framework, which in this case is less? This is a question by Lalit.
Actually, the funny thing is, Lalit, there was no parameter for us. The parameter was basically I was trained in less and I saw a, how do I say it, an opportunity to use less. The bank did not have any inclination to go towards safe. And there were no other very popular scaling frameworks at that time. There was less and then there was safe. And so we picked less because I saw a natural sort of the way the teams were working at that time and they were how they were located, how they were set up. It seemed to be a natural fit for me. And that's what I promoted and also implemented, which is less. Could it have been done with any other scaling framework? Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, if you're still thinking about questions, I did want to invite you. You can join. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and or Twitter. My handle is at Anil Jaising. I'll put it in the chat for Twitter. And I'll also give everyone my LinkedIn to connect with me if you have questions outside of this webinar that you'd like to ask, and that should be okay too. So reach out to me, feel free to connect with me. And if there's any way I can help you and potentially maybe see some of you in my next class, I do deliver the CSM, the Certified Scrum Master, the Certified Product Owner. I also deliver the ACSM and the CSP SM. So the path to the CSP, I'm a path to CSP educator. So if you are looking for those courses, feel free to reach out to and me or KnowledgeHut and connect with us.
Great, thank you, Anil. It might also be a good idea to tell us more about concepts and beyond. It'll be great to hear about the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about a little bit about my company. My company is focused on helping, well, delivering classes, of course, but the big focus for us, and this is our website, and I can share that with you also on the chat for you to look offline. My company focuses a lot on being able to help people deliver great training. I am a trainer from training from the back of the room, and I do deliver those classes, but my focus has been working in many organizations actually building training for them, actually making it very engaging, very interactive. If you join me in a virtual class, it is not one of those, hey, here's a slide and I'm speaking just like you experienced today, but it would be actually extremely, extremely engaging, where learners not just learn from um, the trainer, but also from each other. So the trainer doesn't become that sage on the stage, always speaking. The trainer is a guide on the side, having and bringing all your expertise, all your knowledge together, and so that we can learn from each other as well as from the trainer. And that's how as my CSM is structured, my CSPO is structured. And what I do for many, many organizations, it's actually consult with them privately and help them build their training. We also help people with DevOps and cloud. Some of the engineering practices and the work that I shared with you in this slide were actually things that we've created as best practices and frameworks, and we actually do that for many, many organizations in consulting. And that's what Concepts and Beyond is all about. Again, feel free to reach out at any time and offline, and if you have any specific questions or if there's any way that we can help you.
Thank you, Anil. Attendees, I'm actually opening up the floor for one of you. If you'd like to come and talk to Anil directly, then through the chat box. Um, Type in your name. We'll have the last 5 minutes before we conclude. So anybody who wants to have a conversation, do type in your name. I mean, do type in your interest. We shall unmute you and maybe have a one-on-one conversation. Great. So I think all the questions are clarified, Anil. I think
That's awesome.
yes. So we don't see for the questions. So that is, I think so would you like to conclude the webinar, or do you want to give it a couple of minutes?
Yeah, I'm okay. If there are no questions, I'm happy to give you back the rest of your time. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. And again, if you have any questions or want to go into a little bit more detail on any of the aspects, feel free to reach out to me. And I really appreciate you coming in today and joining this webinar.